I'm Wahiga Mwaura in Nairobi, focus on Africa TV. Why is Somalia offering the US exclusive control of at least 2 ports and air bases? And are tariffs or taxes on imported goods back in fashion, not just in the US, but also for 3 Sahel states? First, we go to Somalia. Why would a modern state voluntarily give up some of its national assets to a more powerful nation? Well, that's what the Somalia central government did recently, offering the United States access to strategic ports and air bases in the region. Well, the US is yet to respond to this offer, but Somaliland, the self-declared republic in the region, has rejected this move because part of the offer was the port and air base in Berbera, which they oversee at the moment. Now, this port lies on the vital Gulf of Aden, connecting Djibouti, Yemen, and the Red Sea, and is now at the heart of a diplomatic tug-of-war with the Somaliland administration said to be quietly hoping for recognition from the Trump administration. Now, the US currently operates a naval base in the region that's in neighboring Djibouti and is currently leading efforts to secure the southern Red Sea from ongoing Houthi attacks on merchant ships. Might Somalia's offer be of interest? Well, we spoke to Patricia Rodriguez, the director for Sub-Saharan Africa at Control Risks, about these developments and how they further shift geopolitics in the region. This is what she told me.
So the port of Berbera is the main port in Somaliland, and it's pretty strategically located on the Red Sea. It's garnered a lot of attention recently, mostly because the UAE and the port-operated DP World entered into an agreement with Somaliland authorities to essentially manage the port of Berbera. Now, this is super controversial, mostly because Somaliland is not recognized internationally as an independent country, despite declaring its self-independence from Somalia in the early 90s. And so this deal with DP World caused a lot of controversy because it was viewed by the federal government of Somalia in Mogadishu as violating its territorial sovereignty. Since then, Ethiopia and Somaliland last year, so January 2024, agreed that Ethiopia would start using the port of Berbera, and this kind of cemented its position as an emerging big port, I would put it that way, but also further triggered anger amongst government officials in Mogadishu, who believed that Ethiopia should not have entered into any agreement with Somaliland.
With all that now in mind, why do you think Somalia is making this move to offer a port to the US that it technically doesn't quite operate?
Again, quite a complicated one. So there has been a lot of, reporting around US President Donald Trump. Trump has emerged to be a very kind of transactional leader in the way that he approaches relationships with different countries and their leaders. So for Somalia, it is seen as offering this transactional US president an inroad, while also trying to essentially undermine Somaliland's claims for independence. There's been a lot of reports that some of the people that US President Donald Trump is considering to be a secretary for Africa or lead on African affairs are actually in favor of Somaliland independence. So this bypassing of Somaliland's a deal with DP World, with Ethiopia, and going straight to the US is an attempt to undermine that positioning of Somaliland as an independent entity.
But why would they care about a port in Somaliland? What's motivating Somalia in terms of thinking that this would be attractive enough to the United States?
I think from the point of view of Somalia, this is just a big way to kind of allow the US continued control over essentially the Red Sea, which it has been helping kind of secure those shipping lanes going through the Suez Canal. Actually, I think it was a month ago. The US did launch some airstrikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen. And so you can see the US has this continued focus on Red Sea security and trying to ensure shipping lanes are secure in that region. And so by offering the use of the port of Berbera, it's hoping to appeal to this kind of security architecture that the US already has, saying that you can use this place to potentially expand that security operation.
It then doesn't come as a surprise that Somaliland have rejected Somalia's offer to give the US control over the port and an airbase. What does this mean for political dynamics between Somaliland and Somalia moving forward? It sounds like it's going to get even more tense.
I would agree with that. It has already been quite complicated in the past few years over this port to begin with, and then adding another layer of offering it to, outside of a pre-agreed arrangement with another geopolitical power adds this layer of complexity. So relationships between Hargeisa and Mogadishu are likely to decline. Hargeisa does not recognize the government in Mogadishu's authority over any of its kind of territories. And so even this rejection of the port deal, as you said, it's not surprising. And I think if Mogadishu was actually going to try and push forward with this deal, it would be very difficult for it to be operationalized.
At a time when we've seen various countries fighting for sovereignty over, certain landforms, etc., when you hear of a country offering their land like that to a global power, what does it tell you? Does it strike you as peculiar?
If you had asked me this maybe last year, I would have said yes, but we are clearly living in a very different geopolitical environment owing to the election and kind of inauguration of President Donald Trump. So it is quite strange in the grand scheme of things, but if you consider the context that we're operating in, if you consider the historical issues between Somalia and Somaliland, perhaps maybe we shouldn't be as surprised. I think the US would be highly cautious in the way that it responds. I expect that they are probably not going to respond. As I mentioned, some of the people they're positioning to head the Africa department are very much in favor of Somaliland independence. So a lot of this will depend on who eventually does get nominated and who secures that role as the kind of head of African affairs in the Trump administration. So a lot of it will depend on the US side and how they respond, or if they respond. As it is on the ground, I don't think much will change. The UAE's DP World is continuing to develop the port. It still has, according to it, a very valid concession to operate and develop the port, and it's not likely to pull out on the threat of Mogadishu offering this to the US. And then in terms of the relationships between Somaliland and Somalia, as we've mentioned, that's going to deteriorate. So what we could see is a mutual supporting of opposition groups within each other's territory. So potentially a deterioration in the security environment. I will caveat that last statement with the fact that neither Somaliland nor Somalia have the resources to kind of engage in direct conflict. And especially Somalia is facing quite a significant security threat posed by the Islamist extremist group Al-Shabaab. So again, is quite distracted security-wise in trying to contain that, so it doesn't really have the capacity to go to an outright conflict with Somaliland.
So do you get the sense that Somaliland and Somalia will have to wait for the Trump administration to name its, those who head the Africa agenda, for them to know the way forward? And why do you think it's taking so long? The Trump administration's been in office for almost 3 months now. There are those who feel that in African affairs or issues have been a little further down on the pecking order.
I think you kind of answered the question there. Africa is really not a priority for Trump. He's focused on winning big deals on the international stage, and anything in Africa is just not sufficiently big deal enough to warrant his attention. So currently focused on Russia, Ukraine, tariff considerations with his neighboring countries, and the issue of Greenland. And Africa is just not, I wouldn't even say is even in its top 10 agenda for the Trump administration. And I should emphasize that this is a pattern that we saw with the first Trump presidency. So I don't expect that will change for the second term rather.
Patricia Rodriguez, the Director for Sub-Saharan Africa at Control Risks.